Welcome to my podcast, and let's cut through the noise. Literal BS, the podcast you need now. Living in the US today, some of us know a thing or two about straight talk. That's why you need to tune into Literal BS, the podcast fearlessly tackling what's really happening in the United States today. Forget the spin, the sound bites, and the carefully crafted narratives. This podcast throws it all out the window and dives headfirst into the issues that matter, especially those the powers that be would rather you didn't think about too closely. If you're tired of the constant hum of political maneuvering and the creeping feeling that something just isn't right, you're not alone. Literal BS is a breath of fresh air, a platform for honest discussion and critical thinking. They aren't pulling any punches when it comes to dissecting the complexities of modern America, and let me tell you, they are not shy about calling out what they see as government overreach and, frankly, corruption. Living under the shadow of potential surveillance and feeling the weight of decisions made far away, it's easy to feel powerless. Literal BS aims to arm you with knowledge and encourage you to question everything. Each episode dives deep into the headlines and the stories behind the headlines, connecting the dots in ways you might not have considered. So, ditch the doom scrolling and the cable news echo chambers. Plug in your headphones and give Literal BS a listen. It's time to hear what's really going on, unfiltered and unafraid. You might not always like what you hear, but you'll definitely be more informed and maybe, just maybe, a little more empowered. Now let's get started. This week in U.S. politics has been dominated by legislative maneuvers and a major foreign policy challenge. A key focus is the big beautiful bill being pushed by Senate Republicans aiming for passage by the July 4th deadline. This expansive package of tax cuts and spending changes has seen intense negotiation and debate, with various iterations emerging throughout the week. Compromises on taxes and Medicaid have been reported as leadership works to secure enough votes, but concerns persist among some Republicans and hospitals about potential Medicaid cuts, while rural hospitals in particular are incensed over the latest text. There's a palpable tension as the White House warns of ultimate betrayal if the bill fails, highlighting the narrow Republican majority in the House and the potential impact on the current administration's agenda. In foreign policy, the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran continues to hold following a period described by some as a 12-day war. The president has taken a direct role in brokering this agreement. Amidst reports of extensive damage to Iranian nuclear sites from recent strikes, questions remain about the true extent of the setbacks to Iran's nuclear program. The Senate also rejected an attempt by Democrats to curb presidential war powers regarding Iran, signaling continued congressional backing for the administration's actions. Other notable political developments include the Supreme Court upholding the structure of a federal health task force that recommends no-cost preventive medical services, a decision impacting healthcare access. There have also been personnel changes at the Department of Justice, with reports of federal attorneys involved in January 6th Capitol riot cases being dismissed. Furthermore, the University of Virginia's president resigned amidst a federal probe into the university's DEI initiatives, indicating ongoing scrutiny of such programs by the administration. Impact on global diplomacy. Some analysts, like those at Time, suggest that U.S. intervention and actions, particularly outside established international frameworks, could reinforce views of the U.S. as a disruptive power, potentially complicating future diplomatic efforts, especially with countries like China. Uncertainty of outcome. Despite claims of significant damage to Iran's nuclear program, the true, long-term impact remains uncertain, leaving questions about whether the aggressive actions truly achieved their stated goals or merely heightened regional tensions. 3. Supreme Court decisions. This week's decisions raise concerns about judicial overreach and the erosion of checks and balances. Limiting nationwide injunctions. The court's decision to severely curtail federal judges' ability to issue nationwide injunctions, blanket bans on presidential actions, is a major victory for the current administration. Critics, including Justice Sonia Sotomayor, argue this decision ignores the constitutionality of the executive orders themselves, e.g., on birthright citizenship, and limits the judiciary's power as a bulwark against potential executive overreach, making it harder to challenge controversial policies swiftly and broadly. Ideological divisions. The 6-3 split along ideological lines in several cases, including the one limiting nationwide injunctions, reinforces the perception of a politically motivated court rather than one focused purely on legal interpretation, eroding public trust in its impartiality. 4. Department of Justice, DOJ, actions, concerns center on politicization and a shift in civil rights enforcement priorities. Shift in Civil Rights Division's mission. The DOJ, under the current administration, is criticized for a major philosophical shift in its Civil Rights Division. This includes reportedly dropping voting rights cases aimed at combating racial discrimination, backing away from paid discrimination lawsuits, and terminating environmental justice settlements. Focus on voter fraud over access. There's a perceived shift in focus towards voter fraud investigations rather than protecting voting access, aligning with conservative legal agendas. Undermining DEI initiatives. The DOJ has actively opposed transgender protections and prioritized cases aligned with conservative views on religious liberty and gun rights. Directives have led to the suspension of approvals for housing discrimination cases and a new approach to employment discrimination that reportedly dismisses lawsuits challenging hiring practices based on tests disproportionately biased against minority applicants. Critics argue these changes negate decades of civil rights protections. 5. University of Virginia, UVA president's resignation. The wrong here is seen as political interference in academic freedom and overreach by the executive branch. Pressure from the administration. President James Ryan resigned under direct pressure from the DOJ, which reportedly pushed for his departure as a condition to settle an investigation into the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion (DI) practices. Weaponization of federal power. Critics, including Virginia's Democratic senators, view this as an outrageous instance of the administration using federal power and thuggery to impose ideological loyalty tests and reshape higher education according to its political agenda rather than allowing academic institutions self-governance. Threats to funding. Ryan himself stated he couldn't fight the federal government to save my own job because it would jeopardize hundreds of employees who would lose their jobs, the researchers who would lose their funding, and the hundreds of students who could lose financial aid or have their visas withheld, suggesting federal financial leverage was used as a tool of coercion. This sets a dangerous precedent for academic independence. As we wrap up another episode of Literal BS, let's take a moment to reflect on something that's often discussed, sometimes debated, but always foundational: our rights as U.S. citizens. In a world that feels increasingly complex, where the lines between oversight and overreach can blur, and where the constant hum of information can drown out fundamental truths, it's easy to forget the power we hold. Our rights aren't just abstract concepts debated in courtrooms or enshrined in dusty old documents. They are the very bedrock of our freedom. They are the right to speak truth to power without fear, to assemble and demand accountability, to question authority, and to have our voices heard in the halls of governance. They are the shield against arbitrary power and the foundation for our pursuit of a better life. In every discussion we've had, from the big beautiful bill and its impact on everyday Americans to the nuances of foreign policy and the decisions coming down from the Supreme Court, to the inner workings of the Department of Justice and even the pressures on academic institutions, at the heart of it all lies the question of how these actions affect your rights. Do they expand them, protect them, or diminish them? It's tempting to feel overwhelmed, to think that our individual voices don't matter. But that's precisely when vigilance becomes paramount. It's when we, as citizens, must remember that these rights aren't granted, they are inherent, and they are fiercely protected by the framework designed for us. They require our active participation, our unwavering scrutiny, and our collective will to ensure they remain vibrant and robust for generations to come. So, as you go about your week, remember the power of your voice. Remember the significance of your rights. And never stop demanding the truth. Because ultimately it is our collective commitment to these principles that will shape the future of this nation. Thanks for tuning in to Literal BS. We'll be back next week to cut through more of the BS.